Hello everyone and welcome back to a short reviews video for July 2022. This is a monthly segment where I basically talk about those albums and EPs where I didn't really feel that I had that many things to say, so I basically put all of those releases into this segment. Some of those albums I do enjoy them and I do recommend them to you, others I don't really find them that intriguing, and the rating goes from 6 plus to 4 minus, so with all that being said, let's just jump straight into the video. The brand new album of Viagra Boys, Cave World, I believe it's a pretty interesting release. I like that they ended up going into a bit of a more different sound over here, having more electronic elements and going more into a dance punk and synth punk direction, which I find it to be quite interesting and liking this change of pace. However, I wouldn't really say that the album was executed all that properly. I believe that this one feels more of like an album that seems to have a potential for a better release to the similar style in the future, if they would end up making another release that would sound similar to this. But this one, as it stands for by itself, it's just a pretty intriguing release that has a bit of a different sound compared to what the band was doing previously, but as itself it feels more of like an experimentation and one that just works nicely in a few occasions. For the most part, I believe that the album is okay, but it could have been a bit better in my opinion. Now, if you're looking for an album that goes into emo rap directions with elements of like industrial and experimental hip hop, then I believe that this album has some interesting elements to it. I do enjoy the variation of sounds, even though some of the elements are not really that much to my liking, especially when it comes to those more cloud rap and emo elements. However, I find the experimentation and some of the more aggressive elements to be quite intriguing. Even though they might not work that much properly all the time, some of the tracks in my opinion could have been handled in a bit of a different way, or I would prefer them being arranged a little bit differently, but still, I find this album to be quite enjoyable for what it is, even though it has elements that I didn't really find that much fascinating, and it has some pretty cool elements to it that you might enjoy more than me. Lizzo's new album started up pretty promising in my opinion. I honestly was somewhat looking forward to this more different disco direction out of this album, because I wasn't really that much intrigued by what Lizzo did with her previous album. I would honestly love for an album that would have bangers like Tempo, but still I was kinda looking forward to this dance pop and disco direction out of this album, but it became quickly tedious with tracks that would just sound really similar and don't really having that much of an effort to them when it comes to the instrumentals, just sounding really bland and really basic and not really having that much of an energy or a flair to them, something that would make them really exciting, which is a shame because I find some of the ideas and some of the melodic aspects to be really cool and really intriguing. There are tracks that are catchy, that are memorable, but the album gets quickly monotonous and it needed a bit of a more punch to it because it feels somewhat empty at times. I also can't really say that I enjoy the lyrics all that much. They feel somewhat unnecessarily over the top at times for some of the context that it's provided. And yeah, I believe that it's just an average album that I had expectations for more. It was building up for something better, but it ends up being kinda tedious and not really that much interesting. Now, I wasn't really looking that much forward to the new Suicide Commando album, mainly because I wasn't really into the idea of just having sort of the main album being like a double album with the entire second half being just remixes. I don't really get it why this is a huge thing in agrotech, having an entire album that is just remixes that no one really asks or cares for. Now, you can treat the first disc as the main album, which is the one thing that I did. I didn't really care for the remixes, although I do listen to snippets of them and some of them are actually quite interesting, I can't really deny that, but it's not the thing that I'm looking forward to, and we're not even gonna talk about the massive deluxe version that contains even more extra material for whatever reason. So I find the main album with its 11 tracks to just be okay. I don't really find this to be one of the best releases out of Suicide Commando, not by a long shot. However, I kind of dig this sort of new direction that we see, going into a kind of more old school EBM sound with some of the approaches, which is something that we saw with the last release, which I ended up finding it to be one of the most enjoyable and one of the best Suicide Commando releases in a long time, because after a certain point the agrotech sound of Suicide Commando would end up just becoming really boring and uninteresting and just being really forgettable. So I like this change of pace with the previous album, and I like that some of those elements are also shared with this brand new album over here, but I still don't really find it to be all that interesting. There were some tracks that I enjoyed a lot, but as a whole thing, I don't really believe that this is one of the best things Suicide Commando has done. It's actually kinda insane to me that I end up somewhat digging the sound of Lil Uzi Vert with their latest releases. Back in the day when Lil Uzi Vert became really popular, if you would tell me that I would enjoy some of their tracks in the future, I wouldn't really believe you. But honestly, this is another sort of interesting release. I don't find it to be particularly excellent or having something that much out there or intriguing to it, but I still kinda enjoy the direction, the deliveries, the vibes, the sound. It is a cool project, and that's just basically that much about it, but it doesn't really need that much more than that. I find this brand new Suicide Boys album to be possibly one of the most disappointing releases I've ever heard from them. Now, when it comes to some mixtapes or albums of Suicide Boys, especially when it comes to the more recent ones, I haven't been that much of a fan. I don't really believe that they have that much great elements to them. There is a lot of filler tracks, and I find this to be the case with this album as well. Now, this one goes into some more laid-back elements. There is not that much of an intensity to it for the most part, and the only tracks that I ended up sort of enjoying were the ones that were more like bangers. For the most part, this album feels really bland. The chopped and screwed sound is overplayed over here in my opinion, and it becomes a bit tedious after a while. So yeah, I didn't really find that many interesting elements about this particular album. Outside of a very few tracks, this just ends up feeling really bland and boring. At first I was kinda getting the hype with this new Beyoncé album, but it would just go on and on and on, and while it had a few tracks that were somewhat intriguing and being somewhat different in comparison to what I would expect, this was a really long album that in my opinion after a certain point it was just really boring and forgettable. Now, like I said, some of the tracks were really cool with their production, with their sounds, but for the most part, I don't really see the appeal. I believe that this is just a pretty average pop album for the most part that sounds kinda bland at times. Like I believe that if this was another pop artist that didn't really have the massive popularity of Beyoncé, I don't really feel people would talk that much about it, because yeah, for the most part I don't really find this album to have something that much significant to it in order to make it all that special of a release. Imperial Triumph returned with another album that in terms of performances, it is masterful. Some of the stuff they do with the avant-garde elements are simply insane. They are really complex and they sound inhuman at times. I can definitely give them that. But this is mostly the main thing that I can give them, because apart from that, once again, I can't really get into their albums. I believe that their ideas are not really that much there. It's mostly just them just proving to you that they're amazing musicians when it comes to just performing some insane stuff. Beyond that, this is another album in this whole dissonant death metal sound that I can't really get into. I believe that it gets a bit tedious and boring after a while. And once again, I believe that this album is at its best when it comes to the more avant-garde and experimental elements. Apart from that, I just don't really find that much of an enjoyment out of this. And that's basically it for the short reviews of July 2022. What's your opinion on any of those albums and EPs? Like them, dislike them, why? And what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.